kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadaatatam Bhuvi Grinanti Bhuridachana. So before I start, I'll just address one question if, in case I forget. Prabir Babu had raised it, emailed to me about experience in Sushupti, deep sleep. So yes, Prabir Babu, you're right. It is what we normally consider experience requires the reflected consciousness. So consciousness reflected in the mind or in the vritti of the antakarana, which illumines. So that's the kind of experience we're having all the time right now. With the help of sense organs, that reflected consciousness, it reveals forms, sight, smell, taste, touch, sound. With the help of just the mind, the reflected consciousness reveals memories, ideas, desires in the mind. In deep sleep, because the mind goes to sleep, deep sleep is basically a state of the mind. Mind becomes inactive. Therefore, there is no reflected consciousness there, and that's why there is no specific knowledge. But as you pointed out, consciousness is still there. Atman is still there, and the nature of Atman is to reveal. So it reveals that state of blankness, and that itself, you see, what is the object there? You may consider either no specific object is there. That's why we have no specific knowledge. But that mass of ignorance which is there, the mind shut down, in that shutdown state, in the seed state, that itself can be considered as an object for consciousness. Panchalashikara, in the first chapter, he says that tamaha, the darkness, that itself is the object of consciousness in deep sleep. But because there's no reflected consciousness, there is no vritti, and therefore the experience we have is a peculiar kind of experience of blankness. It feels like nothing. All right. Let us go back to the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And we are on Sunday, 9th April, 1882. And this is page 96. Sri Ramakrishna was seated with his devotees in the drawing room of Pran Krishna Mukherjee's house in Calcutta. It was between 1 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Since Colonel Vishwanath, there's a footnote, the resident of the Nepalese government in Calcutta and a devotee of the master, Vishwanath Upadhyay. Since Colonel Vishwanath lived in that neighborhood, the master intended to visit him before going to see Keshab at the Lily Cottage. And the Lily Cottage is still there. If those who have seen in Calcutta, and there is a lake, like a pool with lilies. That's why it's called a Lily Cottage. And it's still maintained in exactly the same way. It's a very old house. Luckily, they haven't demolished it. So just like Sri Ramakrishna, we went to see it one day. I couldn't go inside because it was locked. Nobody was around, but you can go and see it. The Lily Cottage. A number of neighbors and other friends of Pran Krishna had been invited to meet Sri Ramakrishna. They were all eager to hear his words. Master, God and his glory, the universe is his glory. People see his glory and forget everything. They do not seek God, whose glory is this world. All seek to enjoy lust and gold. But there is too much misery and worry in that. This world is the whirlpool, is like the whirlpool of the Vishalakshi. There's a footnote. A stream near Sri Ramakrishna's birthplace. This is close to Kamarpukur. There's a whirlpool there. If somebody falls inside, you cannot swim out. You drown. The world is like the whirlpool of the Vishalakshi. Once a boat gets into it, there is no hope of its rescue. Again, the world is like a thorny bush. You have hardly freed yourself from one set of thorns before you find yourself entangled in another. Once you enter a labyrinth, you find it very difficult to get out. Living in the world, a man becomes seared, as it were. A devotee. Then what is the way, sir? Master. Prayer and the company of holy men. You cannot get rid of an ailment without the help of a physician. But it is not enough to be in the company of religious people only for a day. You should constantly seek it, for the disease has become chronic. Again, you can't understand the pulse rightly unless you live with a physician. moving with him constantly, you learn to distinguish between the pulse of phlegm and the pulse of bile. So this is the reference to the physicians who would feel the pulse and they would be experts at finding out what is the illness. Devotee, what is the good of holy company? Master, it begets yearning for God. It begets love of God. Nothing whatsoever is achieved in spiritual life without yearning. By constantly living in the company of holy men, the soul becomes restless for God. This yearning is like the state of mind of a man who has someone ill in the family. His mind is in a state of perpetual restlessness, thinking how the sick person may be cured. So, this is very relevant now in the time of COVID. Or again, one should feel a yearning for God like the yearning of a man who has lost his job and is wandering from one office to another in search of work. So these examples are pretty specific to his audience. So in that crowd there would be many middle class or lower middle class Bengalis, and they would all be looking for jobs in either the British government or the companies associated with the government or the court or something like that. And so it must be the experience of many of those people of going from job to job, or their children, especially the boys looking for a job. So he's using those examples. Or again, one should feel a yearning for God like the yearning of a man who has lost his job and is wandering from one office to another in search of work. If he is rejected at a certain place which has no vacancy, he goes there again the next day and inquires, is there any vacancy today? There is another way, earnestly praying to God. God is our very own. We should pray to him. O God, what is thy nature? Reveal thyself to me. Thou must show thyself to me. For why else hast thou created me? Some Sikh devotees once said to me, God is full of compassion. I said, but why should we call him compassionate? He is our creator. He's our creator. What is there to be wondered at if he is kind to us? Parents bring up their children. Do you call that an act of kindness? They must act that way. Therefore, we should force our demands on God. He is our father and mother, isn't he? So it might sound odd if you say father and mother and then isn't he, but then in the original Bengali, it wouldn't be the gendered, so God is father, mother, and generally Sri Ramakrishna meant mother by God. If the son demands his patrimony and gives up food and drink in order to enforce his demand, then the parents hand his share over to him 3 years before the legal time. Again, examples which might be strike a chord among the people there, but also very interesting. 3 years before the legal time, so well before we deserve it, you get it. Or when the child demands some pice from his mother and says over and over again, "Mother, give me a couple of pies, I beg you on my knees." And then the mother, seeing his earnestness and unable to bear it anymore, tosses the money to him. It's like pocket money, someone nag, 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 and then the mother tosses. And it actually happens that way. I have known of cases where clearly they said that we really do not deserve a certain spiritual breakthrough or something. And you ask the Holy Mother for it, the Holy Mother specifically, and you actually get it. And the person was actually surprised that he got something like that. Is clearly that I don't deserve it at all. Anyway, so we'll just go back a little bit. At the beginning of this, the first paragraph, see Colonel Vishwanath Upadhyay, he was a learned man. He had read Vedanta, Upanishads, Gita, Yoga Vasishtha, and he was very religious in the sense he would perform ritualistic puja daily. He had memorized many Sanskrit hymns. So he was pretty staunch Hindu. And he was not Bengali. He had come from Nepal. And he would say that he was very devoted to Sri Ramakrishna long before. He knew Sri Ramakrishna long before all of these people came. And he would say that the Bengalis do not know that they have a gem among them and they don't recognize him. So that was Vishwanath Upadhyay. Then Sri Ramakrishna says, God and his glory, the universe is his glory. People seek his glory, see his glory and forget everything. They do not see God, whose glory is this world. It brings to mind Isha Upanishad, where Hiranmayena patrena satyasya vihitam mukham tattvam pushan apavrinu satya dharmaya drishtai. One of the mantras says, the face of truth is hidden by a golden disc. The reference is to the sun, but the reality is beyond that blazing sun. The golden disc hides the face of truth. That means the face of God. What is the golden disc? This, what we experience now. Forms and sounds and smell and taste and touch and people and relationships and money and pain and pleasure and this world of sky and earth and stars and sun and moon and the oceans and living and non-living things, this huge universe, all of this is the golden disc. Hiranmaya Patra, like a plate, golden plate. It shines and it covers the face of God. And the prayer in the Upanishad is, O Lord, remove this golden disc. And I, who is Satya Dharma, the one, I am the virtuous one who is seeking. That means I am prepared for spiritual life. And I'm qualified with the fourfold qualifications. I have led a virtuous life. I want to see you. So, like Sri Ramakrishna says later, he presses the demand on God. Remove that golden disc from your face so that I can see you. But he wants to see. But mostly people do not want. Their people are trapped in that golden disc. It is so attractive and so real. And the idea that there is a greater reality, that the real thing, God, is beyond this experience which we are having, that does not occur to us easily. Then what is the harm? Why not remain immersed? If it's the glory of God, after all, it's the glory of God. He repeats 2 times. Universe is his glory. And then he says, they do not see God, whose glory is this world. What's the problem? The problem is, then he says next, all seek to enjoy lust and gold. But so enjoy lust and gold, what is the problem there? But there is too much misery and worry in that. The world is, so he gives a multiple examples. Whirlpool of Vishalakshi, it's like a whirlpool. Once you go in there, the boat goes in there, it's very difficult to rescue. There's no hope of rescue. You'll sink into that world. Second example he gives is thorny bush. So when you cross a thorny bush, you carefully extricate your cloth from one set of thorns, it gets stuck in the next set. The world is like that. You keep getting stuck in problem after problem after problem. Then the third example he gives, a labyrinth. So labyrinth, like a maze. You go in there and it's difficult to find your way out. You feel lost. So multiple examples he gives. This is the problem with the world, with our experience of the golden disc. Another example I forgot to give is from the Gita. In the 10th chapter, Vibhuti Yoga. The 10th chapter is the glory of the yoga of glory. So all the great things in the world, the Himalayas, the ocean, the language, the seasons, animals and plants and stars and all, they are the sun and all, they are all seen as the glory of God, Vibhuti, the glories of God. Many, many things are mentioned. But there, one thing is there, it is Vibhuti Yoga. Vibhuti Yoga means connect these glories to God. Know that they are glories of God, and in me you see that all these things which you see day to day in your life, they should remind you of me. Normally they don't. We get carried away by the beauties of nature and our engrossment in the world, both pleasure and pain. So that's Vibhuti Yoga. The most magnificent things in nature, Sri Krishna mentions, I am this, I am this, I am this, like that he mentions. Now, the nature of this golden disc, this glory, why should it be sorrowful if it is the glory of God? Ultimately, why should it be sorrowful? It's sorrowful only when you regard it as something real apart from God. When we do not see that God is right there, it is the glory of God, or in Vedantic terms, God alone is appearing as this universe through Maya. When we do not remember that, when we don't feel that, when we don't believe that, we treat this world as real in itself and then seek to enjoy it and try to avoid suffering, then problem starts for us. And it's natural because that's a false view. If it is true that this is all the glory of God and I see it as real without God, then I'm in a false view. And falsity will lead to suffering. The Buddha was the first one who's not first, even before him, the Sankhya philosophers and all of them, all the ancient philosophers in India pointed out the nature of the universe, nature of the world is suffering, nature of samsara is suffering. But the Buddha was very big on pointing it out very clearly, that suffering, dukkha, first noble truth. Four noble truths, first noble truth is dukkha, sarvam dukkham. And one great Tibetan Lama and philosopher, Tsongkhapa, he lived about 400, 500 years, 500 or 600 years ago. And he is, to understand his importance in Tibetan thought, Tibetan Buddhism, he is like, for example, something like Shankaracharya would be for us, like that, for Tibetan Buddhism, so important. We are generally not aware of these things because our understanding of Buddhism ends with India. But how it developed later on in Tibet, China, Japan also, there's a whole history there. In Tibet, so this Tsongkhapa was very important. In fact, he founded that order of monks called the Gelugpa, of which the Dalai Lama is the head. So you see them, they wear the yellow hat and all. So this particular order was founded by Tsongkhapa. Anyway, my point here is, in his numerous writings, voluminous writings, in one place he has analyzed dukkha, suffering, quite nicely. He says, yes, so when the Buddha says all is suffering, it is true. You have to remember where this comes from. The Buddha's experience of the nature of suffering in the world. Three things he saw: suffering, and that is the suffering. He saw an old man tottering with a hand and holding a stick. So the suffering of old age. This is Sanskrit called jara. And then another, he saw a sick person on the side of the road. You remember the story, he was going on a chariot and he saw these sights, and then they evoked the spiritual consciousness in him, the vairagya. So old person, sick person, dead person. And finally he saw a monk, so he decided to go out in search of truth. So old age, then he saw a sick person, and then a dead person. And this is literally from the Gita. Janma mrityu jara vyadhi. Mrityu jara vyadhi. Mrityu is death, jara is old age, and vyadhi is illness. And janma they have added. So birth and death, old age and illness, these are suffering. So this is the preliminary level of understanding of suffering. This comes from the Buddha's experience. Then Tsongkhapa says, look a little more closely. Basically, all our suffering can be classified, birth, old age, all of them, whatever it is, can be classified into two broad heads. Contact with pain and dissociation with pleasure. Sukha viyoga, dukkha sanyoga. Anything that I consider to be unpleasant, I don't like it. When that comes into my life, it could be a disease, it could be old age, it could be financial ruin, it could be an insult, it could be a difficult person, it could be bad weather, whatever it is, small and big, which I find I don't like it. When it comes into my life, it brings suffering. The second thing is the things which I like, then I want to have them in my life, and I want to keep them in my life, and I want to increase that in my life. The people I like, the food that I like, the place I want, the climate that I like, all of that. So when I want to keep them and I want to increase it in my life. And if I am dissociated from the break, they go away. The person that I love and cherish goes away, maybe moves away or just dies or whatever, or money goes away, or gadget is lost or stolen, all of these things. Sukha viyoga, the loss of contact with what is pleasurable. These broadly, if you see, these two cover all of suffering. All of suffering is covered by these two. And then Tsongkhapa says, look even more deeply. There is one thing common to all of these, and that is change. All these problems are due to change. Anityam, anityam, sarvam anityam. All is temporary. The very nature of the universe is it's in continuous motion. Continuous motion means change. And now we understand why. One objection might be just the opposite is true. We do come in contact with those whom we love, with desirable things, so there is pleasure. And unpleasant things which come in our lives, they also go away, so that is also relief from suffering. So relief from suffering and getting of pleasure is also there in life. Why are you stressing suffering only? He says no. Now you understand why suffering is predominant. Suffering is fundamental and pleasure is not fundamental in life. Why? Because change, if you admit everything changes, then you will notice one thing, that what we consider to be happiness, it requires a particular setup. We have our conception, and that keeps changing. That's also changing. But should be my state of health. This should be my state of finances. This should be the weather. These should be the people around me. This is how my life should go. My day should go. So I have a particular setup in mind. That will be pleasing to me. But any deviation from that is upsetting from me. Someone, Swami joked, when the setup is according to your wishes, you are happy. When the setup changes, then you become upset. When the setup changes, you become upset. Now, among all the possible setup, I don't know what's the plural, sets up, all the possible combinations and permutations, only one or very, very tiny sliver of it is desirable to us. In little problem here or there, undesirable to us. See, whole body perfectly all right, no problems, I'm happy. One little pain somewhere, one little, everything else is working nicely, 99% is fine. 1%, one little problem, one toothache, one little problem somewhere, you're miserable. Why? On the whole, everything is fine. No. So notice we are predisposed towards suffering. And that suffering is inevitable, because the kind of setup that we want for our happiness, when we set it up, suppose you get it. Things you like have come into your life, and things you don't like have gone out of your life. So that's what you want? Yes. But notice, everything is subject to change. So the moment you get it, know for sure it will change. And the moment it changes, then the next setup which will come up is not a desirable one for me. So I'll be unhappy. I'll be unhappy before the desirable setup. I'll be unhappy after the desirable setup. Hold on to the desirable setup. This is what I like. I'll hold on to that. You can't. You cannot, because the very nature of the universe is change. The very fact that things are going your way is a sign that trouble is coming. So this is the analysis he says. Notice how he has gone. For the sorrow of old age, disease, death, so that's the preliminary thing. Then he goes deeper, contact with undesirable and loss of contact with the desirable. Then he goes deeper, that everything is change, and that's the reason for suffering. Then he goes finally even deeper. He says even change is not the cause of suffering. He says ignorance is the cause of suffering, of the true nature of things. What is the true nature of things? He will say shunyata, the emptiness of all things. Not knowing that, we will say the nirguna nirakara brahman, whatever way you put it. So he points out the Buddhas, the enlightened ones, they live in this very world. Aren't they experiencing change? Aren't they experiencing contact with unpleasant and loss of contact with the pleasant? Aren't they experiencing old age, disease, death? Yes, even the Buddha experienced. But is he suffering? He will say no. Which means it's not really that old age is the ultimate cause of suffering, or disease is the cause of suffering, or even death is the cause of suffering. No. It is not even contact with unpleasant things and loss of contact with pleasant things which is suffering. No. It is not even change. Anityam, anityam, sarvam anityam, all is impermanent, that is cause of suffering. No. Ultimately, it is ignorance of reality which is the cause of suffering. He points that out. Anyway, Sri Ramakrishna here, he gives these examples of the nature of samsara. And notice that it is ceaseless. You can't get the setup which you like. One set of thorns, if you remove and make things okay, it'll get, by that time you'll get entangled in another set of thorns. If you were caught in that whirlpool, very difficult to be rescued. Or labyrinth, once you're caught, you are inside it, very difficult to come out of it. So this sounds pretty hopeless. Then the devotee asks, then what is the way, sir? He gives two: prayer and the company of holy men. And the devotee asks, what is the good of holy company? Satsanga. Literally, satsanga means the sangha or the company of Sat. Sat means Brahman. Sat is pure existence, pure being. So satsanga means Brahman, which means the realization that I am Brahman. So that's the ultimate meaning of satsanga. But you cannot have contact with Sat. You realize that you are Sat. But of course, what it practically means is the company of genuinely spiritual people. So that is a great tonic in our spiritual life, in our daily life also. And he says, you must constantly have the company of, as much as possible, company of holy people. What will happen? What is the good of holy company? The devotee asks. It begets yearning for God. It begets love of God. Nothing in spiritual life is achieved without yearning. Constantly living in the company of holy men, the soul becomes restless for God. So here is talking about bhakti. In fact, I was reading Swami Vivekananda in his Bhakti Yoga. Very interesting analysis he does. He says, real spirituality is renunciation. Tyaga, or more specifically, it is nivritti. Nivritti and pravritti, these are two terms. So renunciation, when Swami Vivekananda says renunciation, he defines it. When the soul withdraws from material things and inquires into spiritual things, that means deeper things. That is renunciation. So the technical term for that would be nivritti. What is pravritti and nivritti? Swami Vivekananda himself defines circling outwards and circling inwards. So circling outwards means going out into the world, into people and things and pursuits, and with the psychology, with the inner idea which we automatically have. Here is satisfaction. Here is peace of mind. Here is achievement. I want certain things in life, and that will make my life. I'll get peace of mind there. And that doesn't work. It doesn't work because there is no peace of mind out there. The real spirituality starts when we turn inwards. People may still be literally, physically may be engaged in the world, or physically may give up connection with it. Physically giving up connection with the world is becoming a sannyasi. Physically remaining engaged in the world, householder, or in at least not formally a monk. But the mark of spirituality is this turning inwards, which we all have here. We who are interested in spiritual life, we have this. We're turning inwards. And so Vivekananda points that out. He says that is crucial. Without that, genuine spirituality is not there. Without that, there might be some kind of religion. We are very much engaged in the world, and we have a little bit of religion in our life also. It's good to go to the temple or the church. It's good to take the blessings of God for our daily worldly affairs. Good, that's it, nothing more. But Swami Vivekananda says what is meant by bhakti in Vedanta is meant for God realization, enlightenment, moksha. And there, nivritti is essential. So basically, what is nivritti? Does it mean that I will, from now on, I will not have any kind of worldly enjoyment and I will live like a monk? What it means is I will not seek, basically, philosophically, I will not seek fulfillment in the world outside. I've realized it cannot be found. And I will seek fulfillment in God. And Swami Vivekananda says bhakti is the best way for attaining this nivritti. Very nice argument he makes. This renunciation, nivritti, turning away from the world, bhakti is the best way. Swami Sri Ramakrishna calls it this yearning for God. Why it is the best way? Swami Vivekananda gives a nice comparison, just one paragraph in his Bhakti Yoga. He says, notice, in the Karma Yogi's path, what is renunciation? Giving up of all selfish motive in our day-to-day activities. That all this activity which I was doing was to bring all pleasure and possessions and everything for this one little self. That is selfishness. And the Karma Yogi must give that up. I will continue my activities. I have got my job, my duties, my responsibilities. I'll continue all of that. And that could be as a worship of God. It is transformed into a spiritual practice, not for my personal gratification. Personal gratification is it's like a bottomless well. You can never fill it up. So it will never work. Only temporary little gratification is there. Again, that hunger remains. Whereas the moment we start doing it as worship, as service to others, immediately there is gratification. Immediately there is fulfillment. Immediately there is satisfaction. And it keeps on increasing. Anyway, but he says it's difficult because you have to give up selfish motive in day-to-day life. That it is for me or mine alone, this little person. Difficult to be unselfish directly. So he said that renunciation is difficult. I remember seeing this Hollywood movie long ago. There was a comedian, Eddie Murphy. So I've forgotten the name of the movie, but I remember the scene very well. So here's this guy, somewhere, I'm sure it was in New York, and people are giving donations, maybe to a church collection or the Salvation Army or something. So Eddie Murphy also comes along and he takes out like a $50 bill or something, and he's giving very happily. He gives to the man, and the man grabs the bill, and Eddie Murphy can't let go. He himself cannot let go. It's so hilarious. It shows it is actually quite profound. It shows the inner workings. You can see the expression that it's so difficult to give. I want it. I want to give it, but I also want it for myself. And that man is pulling, and Eddie Murphy he's pulling. He's unable to let go. So it's difficult. Karma yoga's renunciation is difficult. To give up selfish motive and yet keep on doing something. Then the second one he says is the Raja Yogi's renunciation. The Raja Yogi sits in meditation and sees that no fulfillment is possible in nature, Prakriti. So Prakriti Purusha Vyoga, let go of material nature. And this the Raja Yogi sees in his or her own personal experience. I am not Prakriti, Prakriti is not me, and step away from Prakriti. But Prakriti is everything. Is this universe, is this body, up to the mind. Everything is Prakriti. I am the witness of Prakriti. Difficult to let go. And then he says, the Jnana Yoga is the yoga, he says, is a direct path, Swami Vivekananda. But he says it's the most difficult renunciation of all. By sheer philosophical insight, you realize even Prakriti is not real. It is all an appearance in consciousness. We keep talking about it. We discuss these things again and again. How everything that we see is literally an appearance in consciousness. There's nothing outside consciousness. So consciousness, Atman, is the only real thing. The entire universe, Prakriti, is renounced not because I'm stepping away from it. The difference between Sankhya Yoga renunciation and Advaita renunciation. Advaita renunciation is Jagat Mithya. It's an appearance. You're seeing it, and you're yet declaring it's a dream, it's a movie, it's a snake in the rope. So difficult. And this has to be done in Jnana Yoga at the first step, beginning, not at the end. It's the beginning. Otherwise, you cannot be established in the non-dual Brahman. So he says, so what's the point? He says what Sri Ramakrishna is saying here, the yearning for God is natural renunciation. He says it is smooth, it is not violent. You don't have to forcibly give. He says absolutely nothing you have to do. You just add God to your, whatever things you like, add God to it. And so Vivekananda, I remember he gives some nice examples. 4 examples he gives. Each example, so while you think about it, it's so nicely selected to show different aspects of bhakti. He says when so he talks about a boy and a girl falling in love, and then they fall out of love and they love somebody else, and it is naturally given up. The love earlier, the person does not feel the lack of the earlier person because is now in love with somebody else. So that's one aspect, he says. It is natural. You don't feel the lack of all worldly pleasures and all because already you are in love with God. So bhakti is basically falling in love with God. The second example he gives is a person loves the country and then goes mature and loves the whole world. So the patriotism is now mature. That patriotism is not based on hating others. It is wider and greater love for for everything. So when you move from worldly love or attachment to love of God, you move to something much greater, much more universal. The third example he gives is a person who moves from lower pleasure to higher pleasure. So just pleasure in the senses, eating and drinking, that sense pleasure. But then when you get the pleasure, you understand culture, art, or good literature. The joy is much more than eating and drinking. You don't want more and more cookies and food, nice, tasty food. No, you would rather enjoy the masterpieces of art. You'd rather go. I think today is the 151st anniversary of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Google had a like when they put those cartoons in the search engine. So it said that Metropolitan Museum of Art 151st anniversary or something like that today. Now collection, what is there to see? Those who do not have that training, they'll get bored. Oh, a bunch of old things have been kept there. But those who understand significance of history and art, it is a treasure house, greatest treasure house. Literature, music, dance, painting, all of these things. So culture gives much more pleasure than sense pleasures. And an intellectual pleasure. The joy of a scientist, a mathematician, it may sound very boring and difficult. We used to think the most boring thing we could learn was Sanskrit grammar. But it was always pointed out to us, those like Sanskrit pundits, they thoroughly enjoy the grammar. It's a source of great joy to them, great pleasure to them. So for the rest of us, grammar is boring. So that is not the fault of grammar. It is the fault of our lack of our cultivation. So he says, from sense pleasure to culture of all sorts, there's a whole spectrum. Swami Vivekananda says more pleasure. And then he says the much greater than that. Sense pleasure, intellectual culture and intellectual pleasure, much greater than that. He says is the ultimate joy. He calls it the bliss of love of God. Bhakti is the love of, which is the highest joy. The most pleasurable thing is bhakti, the greatest pleasure. And another example also he gave. So these are some of the examples that Swami Vivekananda gave to indicate why this yearning for God. The same renunciation comes. The renunciation of the Karma Yogi, the renunciation of the Jnana Yogi, the renunciation of the Raja Yogi, they all come. Exactly. It sounds so difficult when we put it in that paradigm. All your unselfish things, you have to be unselfish, give up all selfish motive. It sounds very boring and difficult. And then he says you have to step out of entire material existence. I'm only the awareness, witnessing everything. Sankhya Yoga. That sounds so abstract. And Advaita even more so. The whole thing is a dream. It sounds good as philosophy, but to live like that is very difficult. But in bhakti, same thing is attained smoothly, effortlessly, and sweetly. You are happy. You're moved to a greater love. You're moved to something vaster, and you're moved to something much more pleasurable, the most intense joy. Swami Vivekananda there, he talks about another interesting thing I'll share, though it's not directly mentioned here. He says the secret of bhakti is this. See, we all have pleasure and pain in our lives. The problem is, he says, not in the pleasure and pain themselves. Because that same pleasure and pain can take us to God. But it's because we are in pain or we are seeking pleasure in the wrong things, that's why we are caught in samsara. And how to take it towards the right thing? He says, pain also has its uses, he says. Instead of being in pain because the weather is not good or somebody said such and such word to you or something went wrong in your day-to-day life, be in pain that you cannot see God. Be in pain that God does not feel real to you. Miss the presence of God. He actually quotes from Vishnu Puran there. He says about the gopis. The question is, how can bhakti lead to moksha? And the answer is given a very beautiful way in that Vishnu Puran verse. Swami Vivekananda himself quotes it. He says, because of the intense joy of thinking of Krishna, the intense delight of thinking about Krishna, all the good karma of the gopis was exhausted. See, remember, what is karma, law of karma? Good karma gives you happiness, bad karma gives you pain. All my sorrow is due to my own bad karma, all my happiness is due to my own good karma. So when we are getting happiness, remember, your good karma is being used up. So don't feel too happy about it. And when you're in unhappiness, sorrow, you should feel happy because bad karma is being exhausted, burnt up. So the Vishnu Puran verse says, the intense enjoyment about thinking about Krishna, that burnt away the good karma of the gopis. And the intense sorrow of missing Krishna, that I cannot see him, I do not have him in my life. Those tears, they burnt away the bad karma of the gopis, and they attained freedom, moksha. So he says, Swami Vivekananda, that our pain connected to God. From now on, make up your mind, I will not be unhappy for anything in the world. My unhappiness will be related to God only. The day I have not taken the name of God, that's an unhappy day, not a rainy day. And he says, pleasure. All the things that we want, we're chasing in the world for pleasure. Instead of connecting pleasure to that, connect pleasure to God. So reading about God, hearing about God, listening to music, in many ways I can enjoy God. Looking at the picture of my Ishta Devata, ritualistic worship, reading the life story of avatars and saints, all of these ways, just the whole staying in holiness, that gives me greatest joy. So I will, from now on, my pleasure is not connected to worldly things, only I will take joy in pleasure in divine things, in holy things. My pain is not connected to worldly problems and disappointments. I make up my mind not to bother what happens in the world. Now, one little addition here. Swami Vivekananda is not mentioned there. If we actually try to practice it, it's still difficult. I will not be unhappy for anything that happens in the world, and I will not chase anything pleasurable in the world. It's still difficult. So one little further advantage is there, further easier it is made. If we cannot give up the pleasure in the world, if we are still moved by the unhappiness in the world, at least connected to God. So I like this sweet. All right, you cannot give it up, then mentally offer it to God and take it as a prasad, as the sacred food. In fact, take all food and drink, mentally offer to God, and then take it. It becomes a habit. Then you connect your worldly consumption to God. Sorrow, somebody says something, or somebody misbehaves with it, and it's difficult to say, I will not be moved. And if I'm moved by it, then one thing we can do is immediately take it to God. Here is my sorrow. I'm not complaining to any worldly authority, I'm complaining to God. So connect your sorrow to God, if there is worldly sorrow and you cannot prevent it, and it's not easy in the beginning. If the worldly sorrow, connect it to God, take it to God, complain to God. One classic example is the Holy Mother herself. Imagine this young girl, she is coming to her husband from a distant village, and she has heard things like husband has gone mad or whatnot. And then she comes to Calcutta, very difficult journey in those days. A few hours nowadays you can go back vehicle. Those days to walk and cross a river and take a bullock cart and so on and come. She comes. And Hridayaram, who is looking after Sri Ramakrishna, is jealous that maybe I will not be important anymore. This Sarada Devi has come, she will become more important or something. And he just told Sri Ramakrishna, this is not an auspicious day, Thursday, she has come on a Thursday or something like that, he said. And Sri Ramakrishna, amazing, he did not take her side at all. He told her, you better go back and come again at a more auspicious time. Imagine the lack of consideration. Huh? Instead of being annoyed or angry or unhappy, all she did, she went straight to the temple of Kali in Dakshineshwar and bowed down there and said, Mother, you brought me now. It's your will that I'll go away. Again, when you bring me, I will come again. And she went away. She did not fight with Hridaya, did not complain to grumble to her husband, nothing. And look at the sheer dedication to God and the sheer dignity of her approach to things. Of course, Hridaya Ram had to pay dearly for that. He totally lost the company of Sri Ramakrishna for the rest of his life. So, sorrow, take it to God. So Sri Ramakrishna says here, yearning for God, he gives examples. And what will happen then? This yearning for God, the sorrow for God, not for anything else. He gives examples. Restless, ill in the family, and we become so restless. And it's very natural. Somebody dear to us is ill, maybe in the hospital, somebody known to you. It's a nagging worry all the time, uneasiness all the time. He uses that example. Can you make it? See, exactly what Swami Vivekananda said. You're like the suffering in the world connected to God. Let the mind suffer for God. Pleasure in the world, let the mind enjoy God, not things in the world. But he is giving vivid examples from the world. Another example he gives is like the yearning of a man who has lost his job and wandering from one job to another, is turned away, no vacancy here, go away. He comes back the next day and says, is there any vacancy there? Because there's nothing else he can think of. He's under tremendous pressure. The poor fellow, he has to earn money, maybe he has to feed his wife and children, and there is a stigma of being jobless. All of those problems are there, psychological problem, financial problem, relationship problem, everything is there. The poor fellow keeps turning up. Is there a vacancy? Similarly, you turn up for at the doorstep of God, that yearning. If not today, then tomorrow. Every day is a new day, like a hope is there. I was reading a letter by Josephine MacLeod in her late, like she must have been in her 70s maybe. She's writing that every day is a new day for me. I don't think and there's any 5-year-old who looks forward to the day the way I do. Everything is fresh. It's because it's God's creation. She says it's the glory of God being manifested once again today, and I look forward to it with joy. In her old age, she's saying this. The second way, he says, prayer to God, earnestly praying to God. God is our very own, very important thing. More than husband, wife, more than father, mother, God is our own. Guru is our own. God is our own. The closest we have, the spiritually, we are closest to God. And he says the Sikhs who say that God is Dayamay, compassionate. And he says, why should God be compassionate? God is compassionate. But why should you think that way? Because do you say parents are compassionate? It reminds me of the New Testament where Jesus says that those who come to you for a loaf of bread, will you give stones? None of you will ever do that. And so how much more compassionate God is to us. If you want God, of course you will get God. And Sri Ramakrishna says, you press your demand. Don't take it easy. That I must have devotion. I must turn away from the world. Let the world not disturb me. Let me have one-pointed devotion to you. Let me feel your presence. I'm not saying as boldly as that, so show yourself to me. But at least you can feel the presence of God, that holiness, the sacredness in our life. You can demand it from God. Let me see the activity in the chat. Girish says, does Madhyamaka refute all models of reality? Because reality is beyond human cognition and language? Correct, it does. Madhyamaka Buddhism of Nagarjuna refutes all models of reality. Models are called drishti. In fact, they say shunyata sarva drishti nam, the emptiness of all models or all philosophies, points of view. And that reality can only be cognized if all points of view are rejected. Reality cannot be cognized in that way, but it can be intuitively grasped. If you cognize it, it will become another model. Is this a point of convergence with Advaita in that Brahman is beyond understanding? Yes. But it's not unknown. Brahman is you, and it is known as yourself, but it's not known as an object. So in the Kenopanishad sense, that you do not know it as an object, and yet it is not unknown. Anya devatad viditad atho aviditad adhi. It is other than what is known, other than all models of reality, but higher than, beyond the unknown. So it's something unknown, you cannot understand it, and that's it. So that's where Kant stopped, Immanuel Kant. The reality is unknowable. Kant put it so beautifully. The two things fill our hearts with wonder. One is the starry heavens above, and the second one is the immutable moral law in our within each of us. I was thinking what Advaita says is the two are one reality. The reality of the starry heavens above, behind the universe is Brahman, that. And within yourself, not body, not mind, the spirit, the consciousness there is thou. That thou art. That is one thing that Kant did not know. So he left it at that. There's something amazing out there, there's something amazing in here. And he said that fills us with wonder. He stops there. Advaita goes one step forward and says, that thou art. O Kant, that reality you are. But he said that reality is unknowable. We can only know the phenomena, we cannot know the noumena, he said. And Advaita Vedanta says you can know the noumena, but not as an object of knowledge, because it is you yourself and it is continuously being revealed. It is revealed as all existence. In Sri Ramakrishna's language, the glory of God is that. And beyond that is God. And within yourself, that is the Sankhya or Buddhistic language, within yourself is that same reality. I think both of them point to that same reality, Advaita Vedanta and Madhyamaka Buddhism. But then, of course, there are many great scholars and great masters who, on both sides, Buddhist and on Advaita. I think Trump said there are good people on both sides. So here also there are good people on both sides. But no, I'm just joking. There are good people on both sides, but they reject the traditional Tibetan Buddhist if you ask them. So is Advaita Vedanta saying the same thing as Madhyamaka Buddhism? They will say no. And if you ask the traditional Advaita masters, so is it the same as Buddhism? They will say, of course not. But the thing is, the way they present Buddhism is a nihilism. Shunyavada means nothing. But that's not fair. Kiran is saying, on the path of bhakti, how can one please God, gets God's attention? Is it by surrender? Yes, this is important. Bhagavat Prityartham. First of all, before surrender is an advanced practice. But before surrender, to do all one's actions to please God. How do we try to please anybody? Anybody important in our lives, how do we try to please? We try to please by doing things for them, by praising them, by being generally nice to them. Similarly, be nice to God. Chant the hymns, sing the bhajans, offer things to the Lord, and do the activities which are pleasing to God. How should I behave with others? Say, I'm constantly conscious that my Lord is present in all my day. How will, notice, my sankalpa, my practice now is, I will connect everything to God, not to the world. So how will I please God who is watching me right now? By saying what, by doing what, and by thinking what. What are the thoughts in my mind which are pleasing to God? What are the words in this situation, maybe in a difficult situation? What words will be pleasing to God? Not what words I feel justified in, like reading this guy, the riot act, yelling at this person. I feel justified. Maybe you are justified from your perspective, but will God be happy with it? The Lord is present. The Lord is watching. Always, all the time it's there. The divine presence is there. Then what will be pleasing to the Lord? I want to please the Lord. By doing what in this action, in this situation? In your home, in the street outside, at your job? will the Lord be pleased. So we do a series of actions to please the Lord. In fact, bhaj sevayam, bhakti. Bhakti is translated as devotion. See, normally by bhakti we mean doing puja, singing hymns, and offering flowers and things like that. But literally, one of the etymologically, if you derive bhakti, bhaj sevayam, bhakti means service. So doing things which are pleasing to God. Then surrender. Higher than that, ahead of that, is surrender. Is accepting, to see God's will in everything. It's pleasing that if you accept God's will, especially when things are difficult, and you see it as God's will and you accept it sincerely and surrender to God and connect it again to God. So yes, it is an important, very important practice to continuously internally. Don't tell anybody. You should not tell anybody. Bhakti practices are more effective when they are kept secret within yourself, in your heart. Just like love, it is not to be talked about continuously with everybody else. It is in your heart. Similarly, bhakti is in your heart. It becomes deeper and more sweeter that way. Now, so to do things continuously, which are pleasing to God, it's a very powerful practice. Then next is the value of satsang is also beautifully expounded in Naradiya Bhakti Sutras. Yes, specifically with the value of satsang. Oh yes, Sutras 38 to 42. I should look it up. Another comment, Swamiji talks about man making religion. If we cannot love people, how can we love, concentrate, worship in God? If the worldliness bother us, then how can we love God? Yes. Now that man making religion is more connected to karma yoga. Here, what I was quoting was from Swami Vivekananda's Bhakti Yoga, more in line with what Sri Ramakrishna was saying right here. Yes. So if you let the world, but this is true. If we let worldliness bother us, we let that bother us, then how can we love God? It is true. That is, so Swami Vivekananda has given many approaches, and each is very inspiring. This is one approach. Swami Vivekananda strongly says, so bhakti, all this which we were discussing now, in counterpoint to that, if you cannot love your fellow man, the people around you, who is living and present right there, how can you love God, who is sitting in a picture or an image or a book or a thought in your mind? So that sounds very powerful, inspiring. That he's talking about karma yoga there. That is also true. But sometimes it's easier to love God because God is a picture or an image or an abstract presence, because then God is not being troublesome. Your fellow man, though is very real, is also very really troublesome. It's difficult to love sometimes. If you secretly love God and try to feel the presence of God in everything that you do more and more, you will find, whether you are consciously loving others or not, everybody will find you lovable and loving. You will be happy, you will radiate a kind of pure affection and goodwill towards others. Others will feel it. I have seen this many times in lives of senior monks who, they are, from their perspective, they are only devoted to God. They are only about God and nothing else. And yet everybody feels loved by them in their presence. Praveer Babu says, in my opinion, personal experience, most powerful thing is holy company. One needs to spend some time with a holy person. That person has the power to change one's mind. Correct. That's why Sri Ramakrishna again and again said, in holy company and also discussing holy things, religion, spirituality, that has an effect, very powerful effect. Satsang. All right, we've run out of time. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.